Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, that was a game tonight. It certainly was played.
Yeah, you could say that both about the Thursday night football game that we watched and the Vikings game that also we watched.
Yes. So that was a lot of Gardner Minshew throwing terribly in the fourth quarter and looking lost, and Ryan Fitzpatrick coasting on his early success in his
as he is wont to do.
As he is wont to do. Yes. You look good for 2 quarters. You don't need to look good for the rest. Like, why is that a thing? Why does anybody care about anything at that point? Just working that Fitzmagic. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Want to thank you guys so much for listening, for telling people about Norse Code, for sharing links on social media, or even just telling a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting us. If you are interested in potentially supporting us financially, you can do that in one of 2 different ways. You can do that at patreon.com/NorseCode and access the bonus content that we put up every week. And then you can also go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well. Patreon is a subscription-based service and works for $3.50 a month or $3.50 to help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay and you get access to that additional material. We are going to be doing a little bit more with the Patreon stuff, just haven't actually pulled the trigger on it yet. So we'll worry about that a little bit later, but if you go to paypal.me/NorseCode and give $41.98, yay math, that will give you access to the full year's worth of bonus material. So if you're interested in such a thing, you can do that however you would like, but most people choose to do paypal.me/NorseCode if they choose to donate to the show. Otherwise, please just continue to listen and tell people about the show and do whatever it is that makes you happy and comfortable with your Norse Code listening. Yeah, I like that. Let's get right into the show. We've got 3 things that we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to be going over the injuries and signings of the week, because apparently this is 2020 and we need to have a absolutely demolished secondary. Next, after that, we will talk Titans with Justin Melo of Broadway Sports, and then we'll go into the mailbag. But first, let's get into the injuries and signings, because the cornerbacks took another hit, and the linebackers did as well, and then there's Riley Reiff.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I wouldn't have even brought up Riley Reiff had it not been for how he had done against the Buffalo Bills 2 years ago when he was listed as I think it was questionable. I think it was an ankle injury, and he didn't really get much play in the media before the game. And then he got whipped by Jerry Hughes, like 13 pressures. I think it was the most pressures that Jerry Hughes had ever had in his career. And then he goes on IR, or he goes out. Actually, not on IR. He goes out shortly after that for a period of time. So his injury was a really big concern, it turned out, in hindsight. So I brought that up just because he popped up on the injury report, and that's what it reminded me of. More likely than not, it's nothing. But I thought since nobody had paid attention to it last time, it was maybe worth paying attention to this time. Now, about the linebackers, so an additional linebacker has hit injured reserve after Cameron Smith and Anthony Barr both hit injured reserve earlier this year. This one is Troy Dye. So the primary backup is still healthy. That's Eric Wilson. But the backup and the backup to that backup are both injured and are unavailable for this game. So the Vikings have, I believe, promoted Hardy Nickerson to the active squad, as well as signed linebacker Todd Davis. We'll talk about him in a second. And then the cornerbacks are in a state.
Now, when you say in a state, are you meaning like a fugue state, or in a gaseous state, or in a state of like suspense, are in a state of just potential energy?
They're not good, Bob.
So you're saying there is no potential?
Right. What's happened is that both Cameron Dancer and Mike Hughes have missed the two most recent practices. Many of you will be listening to this on Friday. So in a couple hours after you listen to this episode, you'll get the Friday practice report, which is going to be really important. But as of Wednesday and Thursday, Cameron Dancer has missed both practices because of a rib injury. Mike Hughes has missed both practices because of a neck injury, which is particularly alarming given his history of neck injuries. It's one reason that he missed significant time. I believe it was his rookie year. No, that was ACL. Last year, and so yeah, and then obviously because Barr went to IR because of a neck Daniil. There's so many things happening. Daniil Hunter went to IR because of a neck injury. It just feels like it's present and on our minds. So in a situation where the Cameron Dancer can't play and Mike Hughes, who actually had a fairly good game against the Colts, can't play, then the Vikings would be playing Holton Hill, Jeff Gladney, and Chris Boyd. But Chris Boyd is a new addition to the Thursday injury report. He's limited participation, did not participate, but that's still pretty worrisome to me. So, if he's unable to go, which is entirely possible, a lot of players that are limited participation don't end up going. Then no, he did not participate. Okay, yeah. So the thing I was looking at was wrong. So yeah, he's a DNP. So that means that he might not be able to go. So if he's not able to go, obviously then the Vikings have to go down another spot on their cornerback depth chart, which they did have a lot of cornerbacks. So there's that. So they'll likely, if that's the case, promote Mark Fields or somebody else from the practice squad. Maybe Nate Metters, who they just demoted back to the practice squad, but he's a safety. For the most part. So they might promote Mark Fields, and then they might have to play Harrison Hand if Chris Boyd can't go. So that's kind of where you're at. One reason that they might have decided to promote Josh Metellus over Nate Metters is that Metellus has played some slot stuff for the Vikings in camp, and they might like what he can do in man-to-man. And so they might be giving themselves a couple more options in the slot in this case. So that's kind of what's happening there.
So is this one of the more checkered and impressive IR listings for any Vikings team by week 3?
It's a lot. I can't recall a week 3 injury report this alarming, although I don't have a weekly Rolodex of injury reports in my brain, but that's pretty bad because I remember there have been worse injury reports before. I think the game right after they signed Jake Long to replace like the 4 tackles that had gotten injured earlier, because that was Matt Khalil's first injury where he missed a game. Like he was injured every year, but he had never missed a game until that year. And then they had Willie Beavers and Jake Long, and which, man, what a legendary Viking he was.
Yeah.
And TJ Clemmings, I think, were all on that injury report. I think a couple of guards and a center were on that injury report. So that one was more alarming, but that was like week 8 or 9 or something like that. So
yeah.
Week 3.
Other than like, Cook ACL, or which I think it was like a week 4 game, or Bradford goes out with blah for the whole year. You just, okay, well.
Yeah, Bradford, just kind of general malaise.
Yeah, Bradford, bad attitude, no hustle. Okay, well, as it turns out, that's a whole year thing. Or AP going. AP went down. That was much later in the season. So
yeah,
that wouldn't have been that super early. But yeah, this is a collection of not good. And if the Vikings were looking to compete this year, it would appear that whoever kicked the gypsy's dog or whatever, whoever has the voodoo woman's curse on Minnesota this year, kindly apologize to that person, because it's only getting worse.
It's alarming, I will say that.
So we have all of these additions to the injury report, and of all people, Todd Davis was signed, who is somebody that you appear to be excited about.
Yeah, well, I was more as excited about calling my shot. I mean, he's like a fine player, so like, don't get me wrong. The reason I called my shot was
this is more about validating a take than it is about
yeah,
being excited about a player.
yeah. No, this is definitely more about me being right, which I don't know if that surprises anyone who listens to this podcast.
You are a man who is not low on confidence, and this is only encouraging it.
Yes, I agree with both of the things that you said. So the thing about Todd Davis is that I think a lot of people were surprised that the Denver Broncos didn't decide to keep him. And actually, we had Benjamin Albright. Benjamin Albright responded to a tweet where I talked a little bit about Todd Davis by attempting to explain, why he didn't make it. So, the Broncos signed Todd Davis. Benjamin Albright says, enjoy a smart downhill linebacker. Someone asks him, why did Denver let him go then? And they said they just needed guys who can cover, which I think tells you a lot kind of initially about who he is as a linebacker. But given that, the Broncos had Josie Jewell, and we actually saw on I think it was a nationally televised game, how well Josie Jewell can stop the run. And I think a lot of people in this market have seen him play at Iowa. They kind of know who he is. They knew that Todd Davis was a little bit redundant, but more importantly, was more expensive than Josie Jewell. And so they were able to kind of get rid of him. But he has actually really remarkable athleticism in some capacities. So I'm working off of a scouting report that I pulled up a while ago when I was trying to figure out who the Vikings might sign in order to supplement their linebacker depth, which we'll link in the show notes. It's a scouting report on Todd Davis in 2019, unfortunately titled "Why They Didn't Draft Devin White." Devin Bush, because Devin White might have been gone by then. A year later they cut him, so maybe that's not the reason. But he's actually not a bad. So for people that are known as like run stuffers, you expect them to be like pretty poor athletes. And in terms of straight line speed, he ran like a 4.87. That's just not great for a linebacker. It's not like a 5-second Ray Malaluga time, but it's just not great. The Vikings typically sign linebackers that have run like in the 4.5, slowest maybe the 4.6, unless you've got somebody like a Kentrell Brothers who ran like a 4.8. But explosive, had a 9.10 broad jump, had a 4.23 short shuttle, and a 6.93 three cone. Which tells you that he's got a little bit of wiggle and agility and kind of movement in short areas. But for the most part, as the scouting report kind of indicates, and they've got, a bunch of really great gifts to kind of demonstrate the point. He's got great change of direction. He's good in landmarks on zone. He's great at, squeezing lanes at the point of attack. He can shed blocks if he needs to in order to get further back into the run game. And something that I don't know if they covered this in the scouting report, he's not a bad blitzer either, from what I noticed. So that's something that, replicates a little bit of what Barr can do. And we explained in the last episode that, replicating a little bit is not quite the same thing as being able to replicate all of it, right? Because the whole point is the versatility you get in one player. But, Todd Davis can blitz and he can defend the run. So that gives you some options, right? That allows them to play him in base packages. I'm kind of curious whether or not he or Ryan Connolly are going to get more snaps. Connolly looked really great for the Giants last year. Kind of surprised that they cut him. Todd Davis looked great for the Broncos the last 2 years. Kind of surprised that they cut him. Now you've got two people that have been starters in the NFL in defenses that are maybe not similar to the Vikings, but don't ask a lot of the linebackers in ways that the Vikings do. So we'll kind of see what happens, but I wouldn't be surprised if he, in base packages, he was ahead of Ryan Connolly, especially after Connolly's missed tackles. Connolly, I think, is more of a special teams player than the two of them. I just find it kind of funny because I said, hey, if the Vikings want to grab a linebacker coming off of waivers, here are their options if they want special teams guys, and here are their options if they just want pure linebackers. And the two guys I listed were Ryan Connolly and Todd Davis. So after hitting those moonshots, I'm going to Vegas and I'm not coming back, and I'm never making another prediction again because that was pretty phenomenal. But yeah, Connolly and Davis are definitely supplementary guys that have starting quality talent. And so that turns the Vikings' depth from really alarming, which is what we saw coming out of camp, to pretty good. But then Barr gets hurt, and now you're back to, all right, it's fine, right? Because now the depth moves up one, you lose a little bit of depth. It's fine. But yeah, I mean, obviously no one's going to replace what Barr can do. and it changes the way the defense can design itself. Again, we all covered that in the first episode, but having someone that can be, Todd Davis, and blitz on a regular basis and defend the run on a regular basis and so on, that gives the Vikings just a little bit more flexibility.
All right, so the next thing that we should do is go over to the Titans preview, because this is kind of a longer one, so just prepare yourself. But this is a Titans preview with Justin Melo of Broadway Sports, and he has all sorts of wonderful information to go over as far as what to expect on Sunday. So let's go to an interview that Arif conducted earlier today with Justin Melo.
All right, I'm here with Justin Melo of Broadway Sports Media. That's where you can find his Titans coverage. There'll be a link in the show notes. And he also does some draft work for DraftWire of USA Today. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me today.
That's great. So obviously here to break down the Vikings-Titans matchup. We're recording this on Wednesday night, so we've only got one injury report to work off of. So things look pretty alarming, I think, for both teams at the moment. Titans are missing A.J. Brown, Malcolm Butler, Jonnu Smith from practice. I'm sure a couple of other names that are pretty important, but those names popped out to me. What are your thoughts on these injuries?
Yeah, I mean, so for A.J. Brown, it's the same knee issue that they listed today that held him out of last Sunday's contest with the Jags. I do expect A.J. Brown to probably sit this one out again, just as they continue to be cautious with him and make sure that they have him down the stretch. For Malcolm Butler, I know he was listed with a quad, so he actually played on Sunday. He was questionable with that same quad, went through a pregame workout and was obviously healthy enough to give it a go. So unless he suffered some setback, which I don't believe he has, I imagine you'll see him on Sunday once again against Minnesota. And then a guy like Jonnu Smith, who had a huge game on Sunday, he finished the game. He was listed with an ankle, but really, no reason to believe that it was anything more than a maintenance day for him.
All right, fair enough. That's good to hear. Well, let's go through, the position groupings a little bit by little bit. So first, I think we have to talk about Ryan Tannehill, because I think a lot of people were wondering if he was going to be able to kind of sustain going into this year his incredible rate statistics from last year. So if people aren't aware, Tannehill was one of the most efficient passers in the NFL, and you can play around with the minimum thresholds and stuff like that. But I believe he was a leader in yards per attempt and passer rating. Although if you play around with it a little bit too much, Matthew Stafford shows up there as well. But he took over partway through the season. Extraordinarily play action heavy team. Had a breakout from A.J. Brown helping him out. Obviously, had Derrick Henry helping him out. How much of that have you seen translate into this year? How much of that do you think is genuine? And how much worry should Titans fans have about him being able to sustain this kind of going forward, and especially for next week?
I think right now, the good news is they shouldn't have a ton of concern. I know a lot of people came into this year saying, well, he was probably a flash in the pan. It was likely a one-year wonder or a one-hit wonder. But the truth is he's picked up exactly where he left off. Of course, it's only been 2 games, but it's got to be inspiring to see, especially with all the time off and the strange training offseason that we had. He was 18 of 24 last week for 4 touchdown passes. Only 240 yards, but those are the type of efficient numbers that we saw from him last year. And going back to week 1 against Denver, he was, quite decent in that game as well, through another two touchdowns. So, he's coming into week 3 with 6 touchdown passes. He's been incredibly efficient. We've joked around. He hasn't looked very regression-y in these first 2 games. A lot of people said he's definitely going to regress. Well, so far, so good. And considering, again, that you've had so many months in between, the end of last season and really, getting football going this year, I don't see any reason right now to be concerned with the play of Ryan Tannehill.
Well, so then that leads to the next question. What's the difference? Why couldn't he look, this good in Miami? And obviously, you've got a different supporting cast and everything like that, but you'd expect a quarterback to be producing at this rate, which is frankly a relatively elite rate. You'd expect a quarterback like that to at least show better in Miami, even if the supporting cast is different, even if the offense is different. He had West Coast offenses in Miami a couple of those times. And, he had some talent with like Devontae Parker and so on. So what's the difference?
I think for the most part, it's just a perfect storm. Number one, he got away from Adam Gase. We see what Adam Gase, we see what Gase is doing to the Jets right now. That's been a disaster. But in all seriousness, yeah, I think he got away from Adam Gase. And B, I think, this is just a perfect storm for him. I think he fits this offense really well. I think offensive coordinator Arthur Smith is one of the better young offensive minds in the game. I expect him to, unfortunately for Tennessee, probably be a head coach this time next year. The play action game, and just fits Tannehill really well. The Titans right now, through 2 weeks, they're leading the NFL in play action. I believe it was on 1st and 10. There's something like 70% or something on play action, which is crazy. Is significantly ahead of any other team in the league. I believe the Browns are in second, but I really think it's just a perfect storm. The supporting cast is better. The head coach is obviously better. I think the offense is better suited to him. Guys like Derrick Henry, A.J. Brown, obviously take the load off. And on top of it, let's not underestimate, maybe a light switch goes off in someone's mind when they get a second chance, knowing that this is going to be their last chance. It's really hard to say, but I do think all of those factors together just created the perfect storm. Look, we talk about it pre-draft all the time. They have to get drafted by the right fit, right? They got to go to the right situation. You need to have the right system in place. I think that's what Ryan Tannehill has found here in Tennessee.
All right. Well, then I think we can go to kind of what a lot of people will call the engine of the offense. I'm not a huge running back guy, but unavoidable, have to talk about Derrick Henry. Seemed actually kind of bottled up against Jacksonville. I think a really excellent performance from Myles Jack had a lot to do with that. But do running backs matter? And if they don't, is Derrick Henry an exception?
So I tend to land in the middle here. I do think running backs matter to an extent. I know a lot of people, I know, yourself included. I understand the don't pay running backs. I fully understand that argument. I've always sided with treat every situation individually. Look at every situation independently and make up your mind there. When I look at Derrick Henry and I see what he does in Tennessee, I do think he absolutely matters. And I think the contract that they gave him was very fair for both sides. It was really, a 2-year deal and then we'll see, which I think is the right approach to take when signing a running back. I agree with you that they don't matter enough to give out, these crazy 4 or 5 year contracts that are mostly guaranteed. But I do think Derrick Henry matters to Tennessee. Kudos to the Titans for a couple of things on that front. I think, don't underestimate the value of knowing what your identity is and sticking to it. I mean, we saw what he did in the playoffs last year. He single-handedly almost beat the Baltimore Ravens and the New England Patriots. Two fronts that are good defensive fronts. And he really carried the Titans through those games and was very close to carrying them all the way to a Super Bowl. So I think Derrick Henry matters. I think he matters in the scope of this Titans offense. And I think they made the right decision by giving him a contract that I don't think was outrageous, but was fair to both parties. And for how he's doing this season, I'll throw a funny stat your way. It's a slow start. You're absolutely correct that Jacksonville really had him bottled up on Sunday. He really did not find much room to run. Had a little bit more success in the second half, as he tends to do as the game gets longer and defenses start to wear down. But they definitely had him bottled up, and he didn't find much running room week 1 against Denver either. And that's been a bit of a concern and focus for the Titans this week, that the offensive line needs to get a little more push up front and create some more room for him. But here's the funny stat I was going to mention. Through 2 games, Derrick Henry has the most rushing yards he's ever had through 2 games. So even though it's a slow start, he's perennial. He's been a slow starter his entire career, and through 2 games, he's got the most yards he's ever had. So they got a joke up in Tennessee. They call the month of December D-Henber, because that's really when he tends to start going off and winning games almost single-handedly. But it's been a slow start, but do with that what you will, considering it's the best start he's ever had.
Fair enough. I want to talk about former Viking, Kari Blossingame, fullback role primarily, right, in Tennessee. He's somebody that, as far as, fullbacks go, I was actually pretty high on. Vikings put him on the practice squad, which usually is an indication that they're going to sign him to the roster for 2 or 3 years going forward. It's what they did with C.J. Hams, what they did with Zach Line. And it's something that they tend to do, but Tennessee poached him, right? Like Derrick Henry, size, speed freak. Also unusually tall for the running back position, just like Derrick Henry, but is a fullback. And I think the announcers even called him a tight end at one point, just because it's kind of easy to mistake him for that. Just because he's a Viking, I wanted to bring him up. What do you think about him?
Yeah, Blossom, I'm glad you bring him up. Obviously, a bit of an unsung hero. I think he's been a really nice addition to that Titans offense. They brought him in about roughly midway through the season last year. And again, I think there were a lot of factors at play, but, the timing of bringing him on really kind of coincided with that run game getting better last season and really down the stretch. I think Ryan Tannehill played a role in that. I think the offensive line, just frankly playing better, played a role in that. I think Derrick Henry, getting better as the year goes on, played a role in that. Bakari Blossingame, without question, also played a role in that. He's come in, as you said, he's been a fullback for them, really, often lining up in front of Henry and doing a good job clearing the way for him. So he's been a nice addition. And you also mentioned that he's a bit of a size and speed freak, and they've used him a little in the passing game. He's actually made some really impressive plays in the passing game. I know he had one that went viral last year when he made a play on current Titans linebacker Will Compton, who was with the Raiders last year. Made a heck of a catch over Will Compton in coverage, and they've used him that way. And they also trust him to carry the ball. They're not opposed to giving him a carry or two because they do really like him.
All right. Well, let's go down to another position group that also has a former Viking on it, tight end. So Jonnu Smith might not play this week, although you indicated that it seems pretty likely. If he can't go, or if they limit his snaps, they've got Anthony Ferkser, who I think has gotten a couple of snaps, and I think even a reception pretty recently. If not, I remember his name coming up in the playoffs a couple of times. Jeff Swaim, who I believe is a former Cowboy, and then Michael Pruitt, former Viking. What is the tight end distribution there in a world where Jonnu Smith has snaps limited? And if not, are we going to see any of these guys on the field?
Yeah, so I do not expect Jonnu Smith to be limited at this time. Again, as you mentioned, we're recording this on Wednesday. Just one injury report so far, but no reason to believe that it was nothing more than a maintenance day for Jonnu after he had, a near career day on the weekend. He was terrific on Sunday against Jacksonville, caught 2 touchdown passes. First play of the game, caught a pass that went for 60 yards from scrimmage. But regardless, this team loves their tight ends. So even in a world where Jonnu Smith is not limited, you're going to see those guys on the field. Anthony Ferkser, the reason the name probably sounds familiar to you is he caught a touchdown in that playoff game against New England. It was the first touchdown of the game. And he also made a couple big plays late in the game to really milk the clock and help Tennessee pick up that victory. But Anthony Ferkser is a guy they like. We feel like he's someone that is not well known outside of Nashville, but those in Nashville know him and love him because he's been a good find for this team. He bounced around the league, was cut by several teams, the New York Jets, one of them, before he found a home in Tennessee. And Ferkser's a good route runner and a good pass catcher. Had a couple big catches in the game this past Sunday against Jacksonville. Actually picked up a couple of big third down conversions. Really savvy route runner. Not a great blocker. That's kind of the thing with Ferkser. He's basically a glorified receiver. Now, when you get into the blocking, you bring up Michael Pruitt. Michael Pruitt is a really good run blocker. That's how they primarily like to use him. And he's kind of taken over that role as their number one blocking tight end. They had gone a few years without one. Since losing Anthony Fasano. There's a throwback for you. Anthony Fasano played that role for them. It was really, played that role really well for them a couple of years ago. Pruitt has come in and been a really good blocker for them. It helps because, again, Ferkser is not a great blocker. Jonnu Smith is so-so. He's gotten better throughout his time in the league, but Pruitt is really good. And I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was interviewing Pruitt a few weeks ago, and he told me and his agent actually told me a story that down at the Super Bowl. So he was a free agent this past year, right? And the Titans re-signed him. This is how important Pruitt is, and some of these guys, I don't think we realize how much they matter. So Derrick Henry is at the Super Bowl, and he runs into Pruitt's agent there at the Super Bowl. They get to talking in the elevator. And Henry makes the connection that, this guy represents Pruitt, that is. And Henry looks at him and says, yo, you need to do whatever it takes to keep Pruitt in Tennessee because I can't do what I do without him blocking for me. So no one was happier than Derrick Henry when the Titans re-signed Pruitt, and he really does play an important role for them as a run blocker.
I can't imagine that the Cap guys in Tennessee were too happy to hear that story because I'm sure the agent had that one locked and loaded for negotiations. Well, let's talk a little bit about that offensive line. I think, like you said, that offensive line's been a big part of why that running game has been so good. It's been a big part of making sure that Tannehill gets protected. Dennis Kelly out with an illness. Because it's an illness, I don't actually expect it to be a huge issue come Sunday, but something worth noting. Otherwise, it seems to be kind of a zone blocking heavy line. They got Ben Jones, who's a former Houston Texan, and they got Roger Saffold, who comes from the LA Rams. Had some pretty excellent years there. It took a little bit while to get going, but once he got going, he got pretty good. And then, of course, everyone knows Taylor Lewan. What about this offensive line strikes you as particularly unique? And what about, say, it's an AFC South matchup. So what about the matchup with Yannick Ngakoue specifically? Do you think could create some advantages or mismatches in favor of the Vikings?
Yeah, so I think this is a pretty good offensive line that, it needs to play a little bit better. They've been really good in pass protection for what it's worth. Tannehill's only been sacked, I believe, twice, once in each game thus far. But the run blocking has certainly been a bit of a disappointment so far. Again, this was a line that was, elite last year down the stretch in that area as a run blocking unit, but are off to a slow start so far. On the left side, I think they do have one of the better left sides in football in that Taylor Lewan, Roger Saffold combination. It's a very athletic left side. Both those guys are such a good fit for the outside zone scheme that they're running, especially there in the run game. Center Ben Jones, again, one of the more athletic centers in the league. Not a very powerful guy, but again, he's athletic. If there are some areas to be taken advantage of for the Vikings, of course, Yannick Ngakoue is a terrific edge rusher, and I think he could give any tackle in the NFL issues. So, absolutely, can he beat Taylor Lewan? Absolutely. I think both those guys, if they go head to head, they're each going to have their wins and losses. If Minnesota's looking to take advantage of something, I think that right side is certainly the more concerning side for this Tennessee team. Right tackle Dennis Kelly has taken over for Jack Conklin, who departed in free agency to the Cleveland Browns. Now, Kelly is a guy that's been in Tennessee for years, so they felt quite good about him being a bridge gap option as a starting right tackle. Of course, they drafted Isaiah Wilson, who they see as the future the right tackle of the future. But right now, it's
on IR right now.
It's been a nightmare offseason for Isaiah Wilson, to say the least. Caught with a DUI recently, had a run-in with campus police at a local university, has been on the COVID list twice over the last 2 months. Again, twice. Let's be honest, right? At some point, we got to stay home, big fella, right? I don't know what happened there, but he's ended up on the COVID list twice. He was recently, unfortunately, arrested with a DUI, and there were some issues in camp. Potentially, there was rumors of conditioning issues and things of that nature. Now, look, overall, I'm not worried about it. People in Tennessee shouldn't be worried about it. They drafted him to be the right tackle of the future. They've got a good stopgap option in Dennis Kelly. Let Wilson get right. This is not a guy that had character issues in college. I personally, believe that maybe he's making a tough transition to the NFL. Who knows exactly what's going on there, but he has not played a role so far. He will not play a role, you figure, for at least the next several weeks. But you got Kelly there at right tackle, and then you got Nate Davis at right guard, who was a third-round pick out of the University of Charlotte last season, who took over midway through the year. As a small school guy who really struggled early on, but did get a lot better as the year went on last year. And he's been pretty good so far this year. But if Minnesota are looking to take advantage of something, you think they'll certainly focus on that right side where you have potentially a shaky combination in Dennis Kelly and Nate Davis.
So Isaiah Wilson and Nate Davis just kind of remind me of just a couple of anecdotes, but really I've just got two questions. One, was Nate Davis the guy you said he's from Charlotte. Was he the guy that had the weird frog stance with his hips so low to the ground?
Yep. That's correct. You're right on that one. I actually interviewed his position coach right after he was drafted, and we did a great piece on that, him and I, and we talked about that a lot. It was interesting because that was such a big theme, right, on draft Twitter, so to speak, right? They call him Frogman down, and that's kind of carried over in Tennessee where they call him the Frogman. But interestingly enough, they actually they asked Coach Vrabel about that when they drafted him, and they said, you know what, some people made a big deal of that, but when we worked him out privately, we had that corrected in about 5 minutes. So it was really something they weren't concerned about at all. But you're correct. That is the Nate Davis.
He wasn't a bad interview at the Combine either. Okay, so Isaiah Wilson, this one was curious to me because you're talking about a super athletic offensive line, Taylor Lewan, Ben Jones, Roger Saffold still got a bunch of athleticism to him. Nate Davis ran a 5.4 40. That Georgia offensive line was remarkable, but it was not an athlete's offensive line. he just doesn't seem like a fit to me. And he was a first round pick. It's not like they were like, well, he's good. He's not a system fit. We'll wait. Oh, he fell to the third. He's too talented not to take system fit, be damned. What's the story here? Is it just like they like the right tackles big, which is pretty classic NFL, or what's the deal?
I think that's part of it. I do think you bring up an excellent point that obviously from an athletic standpoint, he doesn't appear to fit with the rest of them. But, keep in mind, he's also replacing, Jack Conklin or intends to replace Jack Conklin, who was quite a good right tackle for them and also wasn't the most athletic guy, in my opinion, in the world, or at least the foot speed, from what I recall in college was a big issue with Conklin. So at the same time, you're right. While the athletic fit doesn't seem good, at the same time, they got Derrick Henry back there. They also this is a team that prides themselves off being physical. They're bigger. They think they're bigger than you. They're faster than you, but they're also stronger than you, right? And you kind of see a theme with the way they've constructed that roster on offense a little bit. Derrick Henry, one of the more physically imposing skill set players in the league. AJ Brown, I believe, is quite the imposing receiver as well. Jonnu Smith is probably one of the more physical, bigger tight ends in the league in terms of strength wise. And he's athletic, right? And then you look again, replacing Jack Conklin. This is a team that at the same time, they want to beat you up. They think they're tougher than you. They're stronger, they're bigger, and they're faster. So I think Isaiah Wilson does fit from that perspective. But you do bring up a great point that he's not quite as athletic as the rest of this offensive line is.
All right, well, let's move on to that receiver group. So obviously, you got first-round pick Corey Davis. I'm going to hesitate to call him a bust because I saw some pretty good stuff these past 2 weeks from him. A.J. Brown, who you said is unlikely to be playing in this game. And if you're a fantasy maven, Adam Humphries, both from his time in Tampa Bay and from the scramble on the waiver wire for him. And then our lads also list, I'm just going to be completely honest, I'm not familiar with either of these guys, Khalif Raymond and Nick Westbrook, who looks like he's an undrafted free agent from 2020. I'm deep into draft Twitter. I have no idea who this guy is, but it looks like he made the roster. So certainly he's better than your average undrafted free agent. Tell me a little bit about this receiving group.
Yeah, so Corey Davis, I like what you said there, that you'll hesitate to call him a bust. He's off to a great start. Of course he is. It's a contract year, and this is the best Corey Davis has ever looked. I think the way to approach Corey Davis, and I say this all the time on Twitter, and try to do so not from a biased perspective, but the best way to look at Corey Davis is to just enjoy how he plays and remove the fact that he was the 5th overall pick. Has Corey Davis lived up to the billing as the 5th overall pick? Absolutely not. Is Corey Davis a good football player? Yes, he is. I believe he's a good number 2 receiver. And when you lift off the weight of being the 5th overall pick, you enjoy him a lot more. You really do enjoy watching him play when you forget where they took him, because he also does a lot of the dirty work on this team. He's an excellent blocker in the run game, and credit him, he's been terrific. He was very good in that Denver game, and he was pretty good here against Jacksonville as well, catching a touchdown. Adam Humphries is off to a great start, certainly a better start than he was last season. I think Adam got a bit of a raw deal last year. Taylor Lewan was suspended for the first 4 games last year. And if you go back and watch the tape of those first 4 weeks of Tennessee's offense last year, it's almost strange how much they relied on Adam Humphries to kind of chip that edge rusher coming off the line. It really delayed his release, and really they just couldn't get him going. And then he dealt with an injury later on in the year. But, of course, this group's a lot better with A.J. Brown on the field. I think A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, and Adam Humphries, that's an impressive group when you have all 3 of them on the field, with Davis and Brown operating outside and Humphries from the slot. Now, without Brown, how does that look? Again, you put, of course, Corey Davis is outside, and you're going to see a lot of Adam Humphries as well. Khalif Raymond is the speed receiver back there. I certainly don't blame you for not being familiar with him if you're not a Titans fan, but in Tennessee, Khalif Raymond, he caught you'll certainly remember that touchdown he caught against Baltimore last year in the playoffs, where he left Marlon Humphrey absolutely in the dust on a really neat little route when the Titans took a 14-0 lead against Baltimore. Khalif Raymond's got terrific speed, and he really is a deep guy, undersized guy, about 5'8", out of Holy Cross. Nick Westbrook was just promoted to the active roster recently. He did not make the roster out of camp, but was added to the 53. He was added to the practice squad originally, was added to the 53 a week ago. They also have Cameron Batson, who's very similar as a UDFA that they had last year. He's in his second year with Tennessee. Very similar to Khalif Raymond, undersized speed guy. So right now, especially without A.J. Brown, this receiver group is filled with a bunch of smaller, undersized guys. Adam Humphries, Khalif Raymond, Cameron Batson. But luckily for them, they do rely a lot on the tight ends, right? They're going to throw the ball a lot to Anthony Ferguson. They're going to throw the ball a lot to Jonnu Smith. So, they did a good job surviving without A.J. Brown last week. We'll see if they could do it again, assuming Brown is held out for cautionary reasons.
All right, well, let's switch to the other side of the ball now that we've gone through all those position groups. I think everyone's pretty familiar with what the Titans offense does, what it looks like. Hey, it's a play-action heavy team. They like to rely on Derrick Henry. They've got some pretty good tight ends. But I think defensively, there's just not a ton of discussion. Every so often, people will remember Jeffrey Simmons fell in the draft due to injury, maybe character concerns. I actually didn't really mind those as much. And then kind of came on second half of the year. But, Harold Landry, Jack Crawford, Daquan Jones, who are these people? Rashaan Evans, I think a lot of people in draft Twitter remember him. I mean, Harold Landry's a draft Twitter favorite. And then they just signed Jadeveon Clowney. They got Vic Beasley over from Atlanta. What does this defense do? And by that, I mean, what kind of coverage shells does it use? Is it a cover 3 team, cover 4 team? Is it a blitz heavy team? Do they love, zone coverages, man coverages? What kind of makes the defense go? Those kinds of questions. We'll talk about the positions in a second, but I'm kind of curious about kind of the shape of this defense.
So one thing I find very interesting that I'll say about how they like to deploy their cornerbacks specifically, this is not a team that likes to trail receivers. It's not a team, you play with the idea, do you send Malcolm Butler to cover Adam Thielen? Do you follow Adam Thielen around, for example, Malcolm Butler being their best corner right now? That's not something they do. The Tennessee Titans, they line up and play. I'll actually give you a statistic that shows you how much they do that. Malcolm Butler this season has had 56 snaps as the left cornerback, and he's had 3 as the right cornerback. And all 3 of those were because the team played trips to the right side of the field. So this is not a team that's going to, look for their matchups. No, they trust what they do. So that's how they like to deploy their corners. In terms of blitzing, they certainly have a lot of guys who are good at blitzing for sure. Kenny Vaccaro at safety had a sack this week against Jacksonville. He's very good in the blitzing game. They'll send Kevin Byard. They like to disguise what they do. Rashaan Evans, I'm sure you remember him being a first-round pick out of Alabama. He's someone who you may recall Alabama used a lot on the edge. The Titans were a little short-handed this past game at outside linebacker. You saw a couple times where they sent Evans off the edge. Jayon Brown at inside linebacker is a bit of an unsung hero, really good coverage player, very good athlete. They love to blitz him because he's great at getting after the quarterback. So this is a team where, they certainly want to have a shell and make sure that you don't know what they're doing. They like to make things look the same, and they like to disguise that defense. So that's what they do. Of course, they lost defensive coordinator Dean Pease to retirement, but Mike Vrabel's he decided not to hire a defensive coordinator, and he did. Shane Bowen, who's the linebacker coach there, is helping him call plays and helping him construct that defense. So and they bring in Jadeveon Clowney, as you mentioned. I think this is a team that's going to be good enough soon to get to the quarterback without deploying too many blitzes, but they got to get everyone healthy and on the field first.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about the front end and then the back end. So first, I want to talk about, I really like Larrell Murchison, I want to say NC State, right? And I just kind of liked everybody that they've drafted on the defensive line. Now, things have changed around. I actually don't know how good Daquan Jones is in the NFL. I loved him out of Penn State. I really love Jeffrey Simmons. I don't know how he's doing this year so far, but as soon as he was healthy and able to get onto the field, I thought he did a pretty good job last year. I don't know much about players like Jack Crawford. Why don't you tell me a little bit about this defensive line? Who's getting snaps? Who's performing well? Who's not?
So Daquan Jones has been a terrific player for the Titans since they drafted him out of Penn State. I believe it was a 5th-round pick. And several years ago now, he's entering his 6th or 7th season, I believe it is. But really impressed with Daquan Jones. He's a guy, again, who doesn't get a lot of national attention, but is just quietly a really good player for them. And they've leaned on him a lot. And Coach Vrabel's talked about sort of the leadership role he's seen him embrace, especially with the departure of Jarrell Casey. Jones is without a doubt the longest tenured lineman on this team now. And he's a guy that's really good in the run game. And that's part of the reason I think you're not going to hear a lot of see him on the national spotlight. He's not going to give you a lot as a pass rusher. He's a big boy. He's not going to get to the quarterback on a very consistent basis, but he's a terrific player in the run game, and he has been for this team for a number of years. Jeffrey Simmons, everyone's expecting a really big breakout season out of Simmons this year. He's 18 months removed from that ACL surgery. We all know that tends to be the time where you feel like a player's really back to normal for the first time after going through something like that. Through 2 weeks, I'll say this about Simmons. There are times where he's really popped, but there have been stretches where he's also disappeared a little bit. And I don't think that's something that they really, anyone really expected in Tennessee. Again, it's only been 2 games, and there have been snaps where he looks absolutely dominant. The key is for him to do so on a bit more consistent basis than he's done so far. Jadeveon Clowney, the sacks haven't racked up yet, but he's certainly got a lot of pressures on the quarterback. He made a couple of big plays. He had 6 pressures against Jacksonville, 2 specifically that were really, really key plays in Sunday's victory late into the fourth quarter. Harold Landry, another guy that hasn't recorded a sack yet. He was their sack leader last year with, I believe, 8 sacks. But again, Harold Landry has been a guy who the box score hasn't told the story. He's off to a really good start. He's pressuring the quarterback what feels like on a snap-by-snap basis, but he just hasn't been able to get home. He did make an interception on Sunday that clinched the victory on a batted ball from Jeffrey Simmons with under a minute left. So Landry did make a big play in that sense. And Jack Crawford is a veteran that comes over from the Falcons, and he's actually played quite well. He signed to, I believe it was a vet minimum contract. They weren't sure, is he a guy that's going to make the roster, but he was good all throughout camp. And he's been quite good throughout the first 2 games. So this is a pretty good group. Now, this won't shock you, but where they suffer is when they've taken Jeffrey Simmons and Daquan Jones off the field. So when they're bringing on guys like, whether it's, Isaiah Mack, who was active for week 1, was inactive for week 2 because Laurel Murchison took his spot. Murch was active week 2, was inactive week 1. And guys like Matt Dickerson, when those guys have got on the field, giving Simmons and Jones a breather, they've given up some big runs on the ground. So that's sort of the story of the D-line right now.
Okay, and then I think kind of going back, taking a look at that linebacker unit, not a ton of names that I think, again, draft Twitter familiar with Rashaan Evans, but not a ton of names that I think strike fear into the hearts of regular NFL fans, right? Jayon Brown, Will Compton, the other David Long is what I called him in that draft. What should I know about this group?
So I think this group is better than advertised nationally. Jayon Brown, again, has really been a good find for them. A 5th round pick. This is year 4 for him. It's a contract year as well. I think one of the better unknown coverage linebackers in the league. Coming out of UCLA, he was a little undersized, didn't test all that well, which is a bit surprising when you watch him play now because he looks quite athletic on the field. Undersized, but you know what? Not bad in the run game, but where he really shines is in coverage. Really, really good coverage player. Has shown the ability to really, lock down tight ends at time. Rashaan Evans gives you a little something different, and I think that's good in today's NFL. I don't think you want 2 linebackers on the field that are exactly the same nowadays. Rashaan Evans is not going to give you really anything in coverage, but he's quite the force in the run game. And again, he's a good blitzer and can kind of you can move him around and do some things with him in the passing game. So I think those are 2 really good players there. And David Long, the other David Long, as you call him, I think deserves a lot of credit too. Again, it was I believe a 5th round pick a year ago, really popped as a rookie. Jayon Brown was hurt down the stretch. David Long came in that pivotal playoff game against the Ravens and played incredible football. He was in on a couple 4th down stops, 4th and short stops on Lamar Jackson, that is. And he's a bit of a Jayon Brown clone in a way. I've kind of teased where I could see them letting Brown walk this offseason if he gets a big offer, because they have, I think, a really good, of course, cheap replacement right now in David Long, who's really shown the ability to be very athletic and pretty good in the run game as well. But again, another really athletic linebacker. Will Compton is the 4th linebacker on this team. And you're right, probably not going to install a lot of fear in opposing offenses. Of course, he's the co-host of the infamous Bussin' with the Boys podcast that's on Barstool that he does alongside Taylor Lewan. But Compton's a guy who, who understands defense at a high level, right? He's one of those guys who is always in the right place at the right time. And again, he's kind of the 4th linebacker. He's been playing as a 3rd linebacker recently in that rotation. But, really it comes down to Jayon Brown and Rashaan Evans, who I do think are 2, coincidentally, both of them, I would say, are 2 of the more slept-on linebackers in the league. And I think you'll see some of that this weekend.
All right, finally, we get to talk about this defensive back group, which I think is maybe the most underrated defensive back group in the NFL. It's not to say they're the best, but I think they've got a lot of talent there. Kevin Byard is maybe the most underrated safety in the league. That includes the Vikings' own Anthony Harris, and underrated with an All-Pro. And then you've got Kenny Vaccaro, who you already mentioned a little bit. You got Jonathan Joseph, you got Malcolm Butler, you've got Christian Fulton, who's got a little bit of playing time. Kind of impressed with what I've seen out of him. And then also, what's going on with the safety rotation? Because I've also seen that Amani Hooker has taken snaps. So what's going on in the secondary? What do we have to watch out for? What's going on with the safety group? Tell me.
So this is while this is a good secondary, and I agree with you, I think there's a chance the Vikings, could be catching them at the right time. And perhaps, I do predict that Kirk Cousins is going to get back on track this week. Obviously, he had a stinker against the Colts, but I do think he's going to get back on track, and I'll give you a few reasons why, despite me thinking and agreeing with you that this is a very good group. They're a little bit banged up right now. They are missing their number one corner, in my opinion, their best corner in Adoree Jackson. He was placed on IR about a day before the season started. Obviously, with the new IR rules, requires him to miss 3 games. This obviously being week 3, he'll miss this Minnesota game. And they've certainly missed him. You got Malcolm Butler, who's playing through a bit of a quad issue, or at least he did last week. And he struggled. That was not Malcolm Butler's finest game on Sunday against Jacksonville. Was that because of the quad? Again, we don't know, but he's obviously been limited in practice so far this week. Again, this being Wednesday, with that same quad issue. Then you got a couple of rookies that are playing in this secondary, specifically in the corner group. Christian Fulton, of course, was their second round pick out of LSU. Very excited about him and what he brings. But it hasn't started, I think, how Titans fans expected. And I'll tell you what I mean. Week 1 against Denver, it was a bit of a surprise to see him outsnapped by 7th round rookie, that is, Chris Jackson, a versatile DB out of Marshall. He was playing ahead of Fulton in the corner rotation. And then last week, they started the same way against Jacksonville. You had Chris Jackson out there more than you had Fulton. But see, Jackson got picked on a little bit in the second quarter. Jacksonville had completed 3 straight passes on him. And Christian Fulton made an interception in that first half. Well, what did we see in the second half? Christian Fulton came out and played a lot more snaps than Chris Jackson did. So I expect that to be the case going forward, but it was a bit of a surprise that things didn't start out that way. You've got Jonathan Joseph, you mentioned, a veteran, and that may be I can't stress that word enough. Jonathan Joseph is a veteran.
He's been around.
He's been around for a long time. He's been battling some injuries. He's actually left both games at one point. He returned to both, but this is a banged up secondary right now in that corner group, and it's showing. Gardner Minshew was terrific on Sunday. The Jags scored 30 points. And they completed third downs at will, truth be told. The Titans could not get off the field on third and obvious passing situations. So that's a bit of a problem for this team right now. In terms of the safety rotation, as you mentioned, you got 2 very good ones in Kevin Byard and Kenny Vaccaro, but they do like those guys that play behind them. Amani Hooker, who's a second-year player out of Iowa, and you may even see some Dane Cruikshank, who you may remember was a bit of a draft Twitter favorite in his day out of Arizona. So they like those guys, and they do use them. Amani Hooker was a rookie last season, and it was a bit of a surprise, but they ran a lot of 3 safety sets. And that's how much they like Amani Hooker. And he played a lot of football for them last season. And I expect that to be the case this year. He was on the field in some key situations against Jacksonville. And in a way, both Hooker and Cruikshank, we almost consider those guys to be hybrids. They can play some man coverage. They can come down. They're not exactly traditional safeties. Especially Hooker. He's a versatile chess piece, and they've used him that way, and he can do a lot for them. So as they continue to battle these injuries at corner with guys like Adoree Jackson, with guys like Malcolm Butler and Jonathan Joseph, and, you getting these young guys ready, the Chris Jacksons and the Christian Fultons, I expect to see a fair bit of Amani Hooker this Sunday once again. So this is a good group, but right now it's a banged up group. It's a young group. I expect them to be better than they've been, but for now, we saw some things in Jacksonville where Gardner Minshew, who I do think, for the record, has played a great game. So, great 2 games so far. And I think he's a little underrated. I think they came into that game with a good game plan and they executed it to perfection. So this is a group that's struggling right now, but credit to Jacksonville, who I think did a great job of taking advantage of that.
So there's a couple of questions I want to ask with regards to that. The first is you take a look at that Vikings group. You see Adam Thielen. Obviously, he's kind of the standout receiver, especially those early drives where, they've got the scripted plays that go right to Thielen. And that's kind of where he's earned the bulk of his receptions, mostly because the Vikings can't seem to get completions outside of the first drive. But you take a look, you see Adam Thielen, but then you also see, hey, BC Johnson's getting a lot of snaps, especially outside of garbage time. He's out snapping Justin Jefferson. But Justin Jefferson, first-round pick for a reason, picked ahead of teammate Christian Fulton. What do you see as kind of the matchup problem here? Do you think, hey, it's Thielen, obviously, because he's just a better receiver? Or do you see, hey, Justin Jefferson's good at this particular thing. He's going to be able to take advantage of his former teammate, or he's going to be able to take advantage of Jonathan Joseph, who's relying more on his smarts than his athleticism at this point. What do you take a look at in this receiving group, or even we can expand it to all the pass catchers, whether or not you're worried about Dalvin Cook or Irv Smith or what have you, and what those matchups can occur? Because if Kirk Cousins gets on track, like you say, like that might be possible, but through what avenue with regards to the specific matchups on this defense?
Yeah, at the risk of sounding obvious, I definitely think Adam Thielen poses the biggest threat in this game. And outside of the obvious reasons, one thing I will say, I mentioned earlier that they're not going to trail him. Malcolm Butler is their number one corner, and again, I expect him to play. They're not going to send Butler after Thielen. It's just not something they do. They stick to their size, as I mentioned. Butler's played 56 snaps as the left corner and only 3 as the right corner. Well, what am I doing if I'm Minnesota? I'm certainly trying to take advantage of that and getting Adam Thielen lined up across from Jonathan Joseph, or getting him lined up across a rookie in Christian Fulton or Chris Jackson. Or, the Titans may have to go deeper in their bag at corner. Ty Smith, who's a guy that's been there. He played quite a few snaps last Sunday. I'm trying to get Thielen against these guys and absolutely expect him to take advantage and pretty consistently win those battles. Now, outside of Thielen, truthfully, someone like BC Johnson, I don't think, would super concern me from a Titans perspective. Justin Jefferson, I hope we see that battle with Christian Fulton. It seems like Jefferson's been operating out of the slot mainly in Minnesota. So that'll be, again, he's going to get some opportunities against Jonathan Joseph, who, as you said, is certainly relying on his smarts more than he is in his athleticism these days. Christian Fulton, he may play outside a bit more than they would like him to. The plan is for him to start there in the slot, but with Adoree Jackson out, I think there's a good chance you could see Fulton play more outside. But as a secondary weapon, I think Dalvin Cook, as good in coverage as these linebackers are, I think Dalvin Cook's a terrific player and a very good pass catcher. So if I were the Vikings, I would definitely try to get Adam Thielen early and often, and I think there are some opportunities for Dalvin Cook there as well to make a pretty big dent in the passing game.
All right. Well, I think beyond that, we can talk about big game stuff, except I do want to talk a little bit about Stephen Gostkowski and Brett Kern. Brett Kern was a phenomenal punter last year. Holy crap. I don't talk a ton about punters, but Kern was very, let's say, a great combination of precise and powerful. So there's that. Is he still that guy? And then second, Stephen Gostkowski, is he still good?
So with Kern, it's a bit of an easier answer because he's certainly a terrific punter, and I still think he is that guy. I mean, we had him recently on one of our shows, and just I think one of the most impressive punts I've seen out of any punter ever was the punt he made against New England last year. As time wind down, I mean, Tennessee's winning that game by a point at that time. There's under a minute to go. New England sends the kitchen sink at him. They're not trying to return this thing. They're trying to block it. I mean, you talk about the situation. You're leading by 1 point, playoff atmosphere at Gillette Stadium. You're playing against Tom Brady, by the way, and you have a chance to end the Patriots dynasty. And they're sending the kitchen sink after you. And Kern gets off a quick punt. He knows he's not going to have time. He gets it off, and he rolls the freaking thing down to the 1 yard line. It was one of the most impressive punts I've ever seen personally. And I do think he's one of the better punters in the game. He is absolutely still that guy, in my opinion. And they consider him a weapon. It's funny, but Mike Vrabel talks about it all the time. Because when you got that guy back there and you feel confident you're going to pin that opposition inside their 10, inside their 5, we feel a lot better about punting sometimes than you would think. When it comes to the kicker, when it comes to Gostkowski, it's been a whirlwind for him. Obviously, against Denver, he missed 3 field goals, including an extra point. Not including it. He missed 3 field goals and he missed an extra point. He missed 4 kicks. But he goes out there, he makes the game winner. Given it was a chip shot, about a 20, 25-yarder, I think it was. He goes out there, he makes the chip shot. Now, at the risk of maybe sounding biased, I felt a little bit better about him when he addressed it post game. I thought he gave a fairly a good answer. He said, "Look, the first one, and you can put the tape on, is about 48 yards. He just put it wide. You know, it was a pretty good kick. Obviously, he missed it. It wasn't a terrible kick. The second one gets blocked. It wasn't his fault. I've watched it back. It wasn't that he put it too low. Denver got a great push, and they blocked it." He said after that, he admitted he got into his head a little bit because I started rushing my process. That block got to me. At the same time, I'm a 14, 15-year vet. I should know better than to rush my process. I rushed it. I missed those kicks. Going into, the Titans didn't cut him. It's pretty unbelievable for a team that went 8 for 18 last year. I can't stress enough. This is the worst kicking football team of all time last season. It was pathetic. They were 3 kickers away from rolling me out there, I think, at one point. It was unbelievable how bad they were in the kicking game last year. They went through 4 kickers. They mismanaged the situation with Ryan Suckup coming off IR. They had Cody Parkey. They had Cairo Santos. They had Ryan Suckup, and they finished with Greg Joseph. This year, I expect it to be Joseph again. Well, they signed, Gostkowski not even 2 weeks before the start of the season. It was 8 or 9 days, I think. They roll him out there for week 2 against Jacksonville. And what does he do? He did miss an extra point, for the record. That certainly was not great. He makes a 51-yarder before halftime, and then he makes a 49-yarder with about a minute and change left to win the game. So 2 weeks in a row, he's made game-winning kicks for them. So this is a crazy situation. You don't know what you're going to get. He's missed a lot of kicks, but he's made some huge ones as well. So, I expect the nature of this to continue this week in Minnesota. You don't know what you're going to get, but as of now, they're confident in him. They're sticking by him. And obviously, he earned, I think, a lot of good graces with a pretty solid bounce-back performance in week 2.
That's true. All right. Well, let's talk about kind of the game generally. I think the Titans favored by 2.5. How do you see this playing out? What do you think the final score is? Who do you think wins? What do you think the narrative of the game emerges to be? Don't worry, we never hold a guest accountable for pregame predictions.
So I've spoken to a lot of friends in the media this week in Minnesota, and a lot of people not giving the Vikings much of a chance in this one, and I think that's a little unfair. Ultimately, I am going to pick the Titans to win this game, but I do think it's a close one. I think the Vikings offense looks a lot better than it did in week 2. I'm not a huge Kirk Cousins guy, but I certainly don't think he's nearly as bad as he appeared to be against the Colts, which, by the way, I haven't fully gone through that game, but what a strange situation to me. Let me just say, I did start Kirk Cousins in fantasy, and needless to say, I lost my matchup because of that decision. I really thought, with the Jags, Minshew going 19 for 20 in week 1 against the Colts. Yeah, the yards per attempt wasn't great there, but I really expected Kirk Cousins to come out firing in that game and take advantage of what I think is a pretty weak Colts secondary. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Weak and injured. So,
right. Yeah.
The opportunities were there.
The opportunities were certainly there. And from what I've seen, to be honest, I thought it was a little uncharacteristic. It felt like he had some opportunities even in game. It just felt like he was late, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like he was late to some of those reads, and he just really looked out of sync. Is that correct? I mean, that's
no. He was out of sync. I was talking to a quarterback analyst, and we were trying to figure out what went wrong with Kirk Cousins, and at the end, he was just like, you know what? He was just inaccurate. Normally, I would have a better answer. I would say his base was off. I'd say he's rushing his process. I'd say he's making the wrong reads. I'd say there's miscommunication. I'd find a fundamental base reason for why it wasn't working, but I can't. He was just inaccurate. I can't explain it, and I'm in the same way. I don't know. He was just inaccurate.
And that's sort of how I felt watching the tape. It just didn't feel right. It felt out of sync. It felt like I felt he was late on some of his reads and some of his throws, but I do expect him to get back on track this week. I think this will be a close one. I think both teams will look pretty good. Ultimately, I say the Titans win this one 26-23. I'm expecting it to be a close game. Maybe it'll come down to Gostkowski again, and maybe he makes another game winner after missing an extra point earlier in the game. But who knows? But I do think it's going to be close. I think the Titans just pull this one out, but I do think Minnesota will look quite good. I think they're a lot better than the 0-2 suggests. At least I expect a lot better from them.
All right. So the topic on everyone's minds in Minnesota is, should they tank? And I'm a huge non-tanking guy in general, but I also think if you've got a chance to make the playoffs, you fight for that chance. They've got somewhere between a 1-6 and 1-11, 1-6 and 1-9 chance to make the playoffs, given their 0-2 record and their history of production. Those aren't great odds. They're odds enough for me to say that they should fight for it. But throwing out the numbers, this could be a team that's just not very good. They have an opportunity to get a potentially generational quarterback. Difficult to say given the quarterbacks that we've seen enter the NFL, but a really great quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, a really great quarterback in Justin Fields. I hate NDSU, so I'm not going to say the other guy's name. Should Minnesota tank, especially if they go 0-3 here?
I'm going to say no. And I'm not an anti-tank guy per se. I mean, I certainly understand it in certain situations. For example, the Colts tanking for Andrew Luck at the time. I think that made a lot of sense. I would not have advised them to not tank at that time, moving Manning in the way that they did, or getting out Manning, so to speak. But for number one, even if they wanted to, good luck out-tanking the New York Jets. Good luck out tanking the Carolina Panthers.
The Jets I think are my go-to. There's no way you're going to win fewer games than the Jets.
No, and even the Panthers. I predicted before the season started that the Panthers would not win a lot of football games this year, and I don't think they will. I think there's a good chance they end up with a top 3 pick themselves. So no, I don't think they should tank. On top of that, as much as I love Justin Fields. And I won't insult you by saying the other guy's name, but as much as I'm, excited by both those players, and call me crazy, I don't know that they're worth tanking for. I think very few players are worth tanking for. I do think Trevor Lawrence is worth tanking for, but again, I don't think you're going to out-tank the New York Jets. I don't think you're going to out-tank, the Carolina Panthers, who I think will be in the market for a quarterback potentially as well in the draft. So, no, I don't.
You're saying that about Minnesota's son, Teddy Bridgewater. We won't tolerate that either.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to flat out say it. I've never fully understood the Teddy Bridgewater love affair. I do think he looked pretty good last season in limited action with New Orleans.
You live in a neighboring state. Come on, man.
Ultimately,
you understand what he did for Louisville?
I want to love Teddy. Ultimately, I don't think he's the guy, and maybe part of that was the injury. What a horrific injury, and what a warrior he is for battling back from that. I truly believe that. But ultimately, if I was the general manager of the Carolina Panthers, I would probably look in another direction this offseason. And I think I think they're going to lose a lot of games. I predicted it at the beginning of the year. I think Matt Rule was a great hire for them, but I think there's going to be some bumps along this first year road. So I don't think, getting back on topic, I don't think Minnesota, even if they fall to 0-3 after this week, unless they just start getting absolutely decimated by injuries, I can't imagine that they're going to end up in a position to draft Trevor Lawrence. And Mike Zimmer, too. Mike Zimmer doesn't strike me as a tanking kind of guy, right? I mean, Zimmer, he's pretty intense.
He does not.
No, he's pretty intense, and he demands a lot from his players, and I think he's a terrific head coach. So I can't imagine a scenario where this Minnesota team even comes within, sniffing that number 1 overall pick.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This is Justin Melo. He writes for not just DraftWire at USA Today, but also Broadway Sports Media. New venture designed to cover, is it all Tennessee or just Nashville?
So as of now, we've got most of our coverage has been the Tennessee Titans, Nashville SC, which is the new expansion soccer team they have in the MLS, and the Nashville Predators. So as of now, Fantastic. It's just Nashville, but things can change.
That's awesome. A startup, I think, spurred, you said, by by the lockdown procedures. We all had a lot of time in our hands. You decided to make it productive, teamed up with some really special writers that I knew before, and then you told me who they were that you were working with, and I got really excited. So the Titans Film Room guy I didn't even realize that when you said his name, I didn't even realize it was that guy. I'd followed that account for a long time. Really great stuff. And then a former colleague from The Athletic that unfortunately was laid off. Really phenomenal work that they've done together in the past. If I'm being completely honest in this plug, I haven't visited your website yet, but if all three of these guys have the same level of production, the same level of care that they put into the work that I've seen from them previously, this is going to be a really phenomenal venture. If you want to learn more about the Titans, head over to Broadway Sports Media. Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the kind words. We got a lot of great people involved with Broadway Sports Media. Again, John Glennon being your colleague from your ex-colleague at The Athletic that you mentioned, Titans Film Room. Mike Miracles, who's been a very popular writer in that Tennessee sort of that Titans world for a few years now. And we've got a lot of other great people. And we got daily podcasts. We got the Flex, a fantasy football podcast. We've got Coach's Corner with Jonathan Boren and Ryan Watson, guys who have a background in coaching that really do, again, like a sort of coaching based podcast. So we've got a lot of content. Some of it is premium. I will come out and say that, so people aren't shocked.
We're not shy about that here. Don't worry about that.
Exactly right. So it's kind of a similar model in a sense where we've got some premium content, but we do have a lot of free content as well. So I would urge everybody who's interested in learning about the Titans ahead of this matchup to head over to BroadwaySportsMedia.com and check us out. Well, again, we're very excited about this venture, and things are going well for us so far.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Glad to have you, man. Have a good one.
Thank you for having me, man. Appreciate it.
All right, let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from Infinite Rebuilds, who asks, should we envision Derrick Henry running through the D-line like a semi-truck through a fence, or boulders running down a hill?
I think more the first than the second. The semi-truck through a fence feels like the way the defensive line parted against the Colts. I feel like the semi-truck has like a very similar, like the fence just kind of whoop. Like, so I think that's probably better. The boulder running downhill accelerates over time, so the analogy doesn't quite work as much for me as the semi-truck. And honestly, I feel like people actually see a Mack truck when Derrick Henry comes at them. So,
I imagine there would be more leaping or more, jumping with the boulder aspect of things. So if he's going to start hurdling people, that could count
entirely within his weird ass skill set. Yeah,
just throwing it out as an option. Christopher asks, do Kirk Cousins and Kubiak realize they have Irv Smith? Is it a usage thing or a way to hide talent from the field when looking to 2021?
It's just I don't want to let people to know they have Irv Smith. I actually don't think that they've been going away from him too much. So there's a couple of things here. The first is that Irv Smith actually had 4 targets in the last game. So he only caught one of them, and I don't think that's necessarily on Cousins. At least one of those was a drop, and I think another one was a mistake that he made that should have resulted in a reception. So at least 2 of his 4 targets, I think, were due to Irv Smith's error in preventing that from becoming a reception. And I think there was like a late target that turned into a reception for like 4 yards that didn't really do much. But yeah, I wouldn't really put Irv Smith's lack of production entirely on the Vikings' kind of unwillingness to use him. Because they did use him and he didn't really pay back their faith, which is to say they should continue to attempt to get him involved. 4 targets I don't think is that bad, given the fact that the Vikings have only been able to drop back to pass like 54 times or something like that. They just haven't run that many plays, right? Because they haven't been able to convert first down, so they haven't been able to run more and more plays. And so everybody has low target usage. I'm going to take a quick look at percentage of targets, but I would imagine that Irv Smith's percentage of targets in the non-Thielen category is actually probably fine. So let's see. Yeah, Irv Smith ranks just ahead of Dalvin Cook in targets, right? So it goes Thielen, Johnson, Madison for some reason, Jefferson, and Irv Smith. So Irv Smith has had 5 of the 48 targets. That's just over 10%. That's fine when you've got 2 tight ends that you've got the ability to distribute the ball to. So no, they're not hiding Irv Smith. They're not forgetting that he exists. His lack of production in part is due to him not being able to reel in the ball. So let me see how many drops PFF has him. They've got him with, is it 0? Well, they're wrong about that.
Just because I'm curious, where is Rudolph on that list? I'm just trying to remember.
Below Irv Smith with 3 targets instead of 5, I think.
Yeah. That's comforting. Kenneth Allen asks, for whatever reason this last week, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the Vikings should attempt to trade for Jameis Winston. Because
the PFF published a piece saying that, and they just ran through Vikings Twitter. And I love Eric Eager, but like this was like kind of a troll piece, so I just didn't pay attention to it.
Yeah, the idea that Jameis Winston could potentially solve whatever problem is happening, like the quarterback being the only problem on the team, is
right.
Like unless you're signing Jameis Winston to tackle at the line, I'm not entirely sure what hole he fixes necessarily. But Kenneth Allen asks, can you explain the Jameis Winston hype train? I just don't get it. So it's just an article from PFF Eric, who might have gone a bit too far.
Yeah, and if I wanted to treat the article in good faith, which, why not? Look, again, I think it's a troll piece. The argument would fundamentally be that if you're going to have a quarterback that is throwing interceptions, right, which Cousins right now leads the league in turnover-worthy plays. So turnover-worthy plays includes any dropped interceptions, any made interceptions that are the quarterback's fault, and any fumbles, but gets rid of interceptions that are not the quarterback's fault. And interestingly, if it includes fumbles, you'd think, well, of course Cousins ranks high. He fumbles the ball a lot, but he hasn't actually really fumbled it in the last 2 weeks. So the only reason Carson Wentz, for example, is as close to Cousins on the list is because he fumbled so many times. He hasn't actually thrown that many picks, relatively speaking. So Cousins leads the league in turnover-worthy plays. They get rid of that Hail Mary, right? They might or might not get rid of that pick that was thrown to BC Johnson, which again, I think was justifiable, but doesn't really matter. And then they add 1 or 2 dropped interceptions based off of what they've seen. I think there's 2. I think they only added 1. So it all balances out. But the Vikings lead the league in interception rate. The product of that is that they lead the league in turnover-worthy throw rate. And if you're going to do that, you might as well also get a guy that's just going to make a bunch of big plays. Because the thing about Winston is that he regularly leads the league, at least when he's starting, regularly leads the league in first down rate too. So he's an explosive quarterback that makes big plays, that also makes big interceptions. And what that means is you get a bunch of high variance outcomes. So Winston, to me, is a quarterback that will win games for you if you have a bad team and lose games for you if you have a good team. Obviously, he'll lose games for you if you have a bad team, but that's just going to happen anyway. So the value is that he creates these high variance situations where some of his passes are just remarkably accurate down the field. And then some of them are just like wild, right? So all of that, like this piece that Eric is talking about, he's going through all of the problems, right? He's like, Danielle Hunter's out, Anthony Barr's out. You don't have the cornerbacks that you feel like you need. Cousins is going to place a ceiling on what you can do. There is no ceiling on what you can do with Jameis Winston because he can just have a Flacco-like, playoff run, right? He just needs 4 games where he only throws like 3 picks, right? So that is probably the idea that Winston is more likely to win you a Super Bowl if the Vikings continue to kind of struggle in other areas of the game. Remember on the last episode where I said Kirk Cousins isn't the problem. The problem is that Kirk Cousins isn't the solution. Well, Winston isn't like the solution, but he'll give you a solution and then like close his eyes and try to point to it. Like you've got an opportunity to get to a solution. He can dig you out of holes. He also can create those holes. But if those holes are already there, one of my things about the way that teams should approach play design is I think losing by 10 is the same as losing by 40. I don't really care. So if you increase the odds of losing by 40, but you also increase the odds of winning, yeah, do that. Right? Because I don't really care how much you lose by if you end up losing. If you can put in a high variance effort and win a couple of games that you weren't supposed to win. So if that's the idea behind a little bit of that article, I think that's what they're trying to get at, because Winston leads the league in positively graded throw rate. He also is one of the league leaders in negatively graded throw rate, and he's done better than Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, etc., in generating positively graded throws play after play after play. It just so happens that like the other ones are the ones that we kind of pay a lot of attention to. And then also he can take advantage of the unique skill set that the Vikings have with Kyle Rudolph and Adam Thielen in winning contested catches. So that's the good faith version of this article. I think everybody kind of understands that there's another element here, which is I think no one believes that the Kirk Cousins we saw against the Colts is the Kirk Cousins that I shouldn't say no one believes, because, you know, fans have gotten pretty annoyed with him. And so a really bad performance kind of cements who he is in their minds. But I think for the most part, people don't believe that the Kirk Cousins we saw against the Colts is the Kirk Cousins we're going to continue to see as the season progresses. So they need to fix a lot of things for this team to be good. Kirk Cousins can take a good team and make it a little bit better, right? That's kind of what he does. And the Vikings have been a good team and he's made it a little bit better. The real question is what are the prospects if the Vikings are a bad team? Because I don't think he can take a bad team and make it, you know, that much better. So I think as like a Hail Mary, if you will, this is like a really fun like thought experiment. But I think that you kind of have to be giving up on the rest of your team. Not like you don't have to tell them like, man, you guys stink. I'm going to get a guy that's either going to stink or rock, and that's going to really help things. But you don't have to tell the team that. But I think you have to functionally in your head kind of give up on the rest of the team for this to be a good idea. So if you're like normally a 2-win team with Cousins, Jameis will probably make you a 6-win team, which we can argue about whether or not that's a good thing based off of the draft and stuff like that. But if you're like a 10 or 11-win team with Cousins, Jameis will probably make you a 9-win team. So that's kind of what happens there. I get it. The Vikings already traded a second for Ngakoue. They don't have a ton of capital. I guess if they traded Cousins to the Saints, I actually know what happens to the cap. Do the Saints explode? Like that violation of cap space seems like cosmically wrong.
I'm sure Mickey Loomis figures some way to just to put it all into.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll put the extra cap space into the negative dimensions. So
yeah, it'll be fine. Somebody recently was describing Jameis Winston. I think it was right before he was picked up by the Saints as a dollar store action figure version of Dante Culpepper.
Incredible.
So like less arm strength, far more inaccurate, but you get the same sort of like hills and valleys there, but they're just more extreme. Like Dante at least was accurate to a point, but Winston, and maybe this has changed since he got the eye surgery. Maybe we don't know yet.
That's the thing that's the most interesting. Did Eric mention the surgery? Because that would have been the ultimate move. And yeah, that's too bad. He missed out on that opportunity to really troll hard. the surgery is like the ultimate question mark here. I would love it if Jameis Winston just got rid of the picks because of eye surgery, because it seems like the dumbest thing, like starting out. But like 5 years from now, if it works, right? 5 years from now, we'll think, well, that's the most obvious thing on the planet. Come on.
And it turns out like all of his dumb things that he did in college were as a result of not being able to see, like through Mr. Magoo style, like dumb cartoon stuff. Oh, I didn't.
Well, all the dumb on-field things, I would say. Maybe the off-field things weren't quite sight related.
Yeah. Well. Okay, I'm gonna leave that one alone, because that goes from stealing crabs into something way different than that.
Indeed.
Kenneth Allen also asks, would you take Tannehill over Cousins? You have to figure in their whole careers, not just the last 10 games.
I mean, I would take Cousins' career over Tannehill. But going forward, based off of what we know, using the sample of not just the last 10 games, but their careers, I would take Tannehill, which kind of sucks, right? Because I think they're the same draft class, right? And I think Cousins might even be younger, which actually, it's kind of weird to think of them as the same draft class, right? Because it feels like Tannehill should be younger, but that can't be right. Wait, how old is Ryan Tannehill?
Consulting the Book of Knowledge.
Oh. Yeah, okay, yeah, they're both the exact same age. but it feels like God, there's a lot of potential here with Ryan Tannehill. Like we can do something with that. And it's like, well, he hasn't been in the league just as long as Kirk Cousins. But I think that you can get a little bit more out of Tannehill going forward. I think when things kind of collapse around him, he does a better job. And it's like very obviously, and we talked a little bit about this with Justin in the interview, which we recorded yesterday, so I don't remember a ton of it. But it was a whole day ago. How am I supposed to remember? But
that's like 3 years.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about why Tannehill's doing well now and why he may have struggled earlier. And so, kind of moving on from being coached by Joe Philbin and Adam Gase does wonders for someone's psyche and as well as football play. And we might be closer to the kind of person that, he is, right? He's playing well under Arthur Smith. And I think that if he is in an environment like the Vikings, that's a less talented environment, maybe especially up front. But, it's not like A.J. Brown was there the entire year last year for him. It's not like, Corey Davis is substantially better. He is better, but he's not like substantially better than what the Vikings have. It's not like, that he's working with like the Steelers receiving core or anything like that, or the Lions receiving core. He's got a good, not great receiving core. And I think the Vikings are maybe a step down, but it's not like he's cast dependent in the same way that Cousins is, just because his playing style is a little bit more improvisationally, friendly. So maybe I would take Tannehill, but I don't know that the Vikings win that many more games as a result of that swap.
Vikings fan 33 asks, Arif, how do you think DJ Wanham has looked out there versus the Colts? I know he flashed at least once that I remember, which is more than I can say for Jalen Holmes' entire career.
Man, rude to Jalen Holmes. But not incorrect, though. So I'll give you that. I didn't actually think Wanham was like all that present. Like, how many did they give him? Like 30 snaps? I'm going to double check here on PFF how many snaps they gave him. But my watch back, Wanham didn't really appear all that many times to me. So they gave him 25 snaps, so that was pretty close. But only 10 pass rush snaps. So he ends up getting 1 pressure on 10 pass rush snaps. From a pressure rate standpoint, that's not special, but it's not bad. But it's a sample size of 10, so I don't really care. From a technique perspective, what I saw was not particularly impressive. I only noticed it on 3 or 4 snaps. But it wasn't like he was using his length in a way that made it kind of interesting for him. Nothing alarming, though. He wasn't getting moved in the run game like the defensive tackles were, right? And honestly, none of the edge defenders did a poor job in the run game. Like Ngakoue was kind of looping around a lot, and so he ended up chasing a lot, but he never got moved out of his lane really in the run game. So we talk about how the defensive line did against the run, and it's just the tackles. Because Jalen Holmes didn't do poorly against the run. He didn't generate any pressure at all as a pass rusher, but he didn't do poorly against the run. Odenigbo didn't do poorly against the run. Ngakoue, Wanham, they all did fine against the run. None of them did spectacular, but they all did fine against the run. It's really just what the defensive tackles could or more accurately could not do in that situation. And so from a pass rushing perspective, Wanham did maybe enough to justify, giving him a couple more opportunities in the next game, but nothing that really strikes me as dispositive one way or the other.
Next question is from Billy LG, who asks, is the success that Rivers had with Mo Alley-Cox due to Barr's injury, and is it a preview of what we'll get from Tannehill and Sonu Smith? I thought Eric Wilson's strength was at coverage, but if he was in when Alley-Cox was gashing us and was responsible for coverage, this could get ugly.
Yeah, so I actually was really interested in this question because, that's essentially 2 coverage linebackers out there, right? Eric Kendricks and Eric Wilson. And I remember Kendricks getting burned by Mo Alley-Cox. I think there was only one play that Eric Wilson was on Alley-Cox that they got targeted. It was PFF gave him a 16-yard reception, but it was just like a tight end screen. So I don't actually count that as Eric Wilson in reception. So Wilson actually did not get targeted in the receiving game. Now, PFF says he got targeted twice. Both of them look like they are screen passes, so I don't really care. So yeah, he actually didn't get targeted. So he was not an issue in that respect. So Jonnu Smith and Eric Wilson against each other sounds like a matchup where Eric Wilson's got some opportunities. Jonnu Smith had a really excellent game last week, so it's not like I want to write him off or anything. But I wouldn't say that Wilson was alarming. It was really just Kendricks who got beat for a 33-yard gain. I think, what was it, 22-yard depth and then 11 yards after the catch. So that was a problem. But Wilson was fine. As for the matchup against Jonnu Smith, I think Jonnu Smith is a more worrisome tight end, though, than Ali Cox, who is a basketball player. And I don't mean that like as a metaphor, like literally at VCU, he was a power forward. He leads the he holds the school record for field goal percentage. Like that, he's a basketball player. Ali Cox is an interesting player that showcased a little bit more blocking capability than you'd expect out of somebody as raw as him. But Jonnu Smith, who was not the cleanest evaluation coming out of college, he's still a much more refined and similarly, if not more athletic player once you account for like the differences in height and weight and stuff like that. So he's more alarming, but I don't think that like the Eric Wilson thing is going to be that big of a problem relative to kind of the other people that have been asked to defend Jonnu Smith. So yes, I would be concerned about that matchup, but not because of Anthony Barr going out. Like I think it's just the Vikings are not that talented. And so that's where your problem is going to be. The people assigned to cover him, Anthony Harris, Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks, Eric Wilson, they're all good coverage defenders, but kind of everything else, especially when you've got zones or they line him up out wide or, any of that stuff, that's just going to be its own kind of issue. Honestly, my bigger concern is Eric Wilson getting blown up in the run game. Like I feel like that's inevitable.
Kyle Slaby asks, how different would our outlook be if we had taken Jeff Simmons instead of Bradbury?
I mean, who's playing center? Well, I guess maybe if they do that, do they draft probably Elton Jenkins? Because they have to draft an interior offensive lineman in that draft. If they don't do it, what was it? It was the 2019 draft. I'll take a quick look. So if they do that, then they probably draft Elton Jenkins, who the Packers took, and I'm picking him because he was my next favorite guy. But it is convenient that I picked him because he's also playing really well. But yeah, and he was the next center taken too. So yeah, it's perfect for this exercise. So they take Elton Jenkins, or no, can they? Maybe not, right? Because the Vikings picked after that. Oh, and Eric McCoy goes 2 picks before. Well, let's pretend that they trade up and pick either Eric McCoy or Elton Jenkins, both of whom have played really, really well, especially Eric McCoy. And they get better at center, and they have a defensive tackle, and now they don't have Irv Smith. And honestly, put like that, that sounds like a really phenomenal trade-off, right? Because they're not even using Irv Smith. Irv Smith right now is kind of a luxury. I wouldn't like go out of my way to say that because I've been advocating that they kind of move on from Kyle Rudolph a little bit, more rather than less. But there are other tight ends in the draft that maybe they would have targeted. Maybe they would have gone after Dawson Knox, who's doing all right with the Buffalo Bills. Maybe, well, they wouldn't go after Trevon Wesco because he's a fullback. Maybe Foster Moreau. We're seeing kind of what he did with the Raiders. Obviously Darren Waller's kind of outshining him, but he's not looking bad there. Maybe they go after somebody who's already been cut. I don't know, but they probably, if they move on from Irv Smith, if they take Jeffrey Simmons instead of Garrett Bradbury and trade up for someone like Eric McCoy or Elton Jenkins and lose out on Irv Smith, yeah, I think that they're in a much better spot. And I think a lot of people would be pretty excited about it. I'm taking a look. There are no offensive linemen drafted after Irv Smith in the same round. Oh, Max Sharping, who I think is playing guard for the Texans. He's not doing bad. So yeah, that actually would look a lot better. And I don't think this is necessarily like complete hindsight bias. Jeffrey Simmons was one of the people I was advocating that they draft. Plus, he went in the very next pick. So I think it makes sense as a question. It's not just kind of picking and choosing to look good.
Raul asks, why does it take Zimmer's corners so long to acclimate to the NFL? Is his technique vastly different from other coaches? Jaguars rookie corner C.J. Henderson and Bears rookie corner Jalen Johnson already look like studs.
This question was submitted before the Thursday night game. C.J. Henderson looked like garbage on Thursday night. So, which, I mean, I don't want to like say, your question's invalid now, right? It's just like, that provides maybe a bit of interesting context to this question, right?
Sample size.
Yeah. So that's certainly part of it. Is it's the sample size question. So if we take a look at the rookie corners that have played thus far, I think you'll find that most of them have looked pretty bad. Because I've been doing this Player of the Week stuff for the Athletic nationally. And L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Johnson are, Christian Fulton hasn't looked bad, and we're going to see a little bit of him. But L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Johnson are the two rookies that have looked pretty good. And then when you get beyond that, when you take a look at rookies that have played substantial snaps outside of the Vikings, you're looking at A.J. Terrell, who I think got burned pretty deep. Against Dallas. You take a look at Cameron Curl, who's had a little bit of struggles, and those are the guys that have played a little bit better. O.J. Mudia got absolutely posterized. Trevon Diggs isn't looking good in Dallas. Noah Igbenogany, who actually did not have a bad game this game, but against the Bills, got targeted 11 times and allowed 145 yards. Like, most of these rookies are playing poorly. Jeffrey Okudah, the third overall pick, has the lowest grade of the second lowest grade. It looks like they've got Chris Jackson here, another Titan that we might want to pay attention to. But Jeffrey Okudah has the lowest PFF grade of any rookie cornerback aside from Chris Jackson in the NFL right now. He's the third overall pick. So just to kind of put it in perspective, most rookies at most positions suck. Most rookies at cornerback especially struggle. So there is, I think, something specific in particular to the Zimmer system that makes it more difficult to put them on the field and trust that they'll be able to produce. And I'll talk about that in a second. But just for context, a lot of these guys are bad. And Henderson, because the PFF grade isn't out yet because the game just finished as of recording, is the second highest graded rookie, just got absolutely demolished by Ryan Fitzpatrick, which, to be fair, Fitzpatrick is a god in the first 3 weeks of any NFL season. But outside of that, that's a concern, right? So so if that's the case, and I'm also saying that there are some issues kind of translating into the next level of the NFL for a Zimmer corner, what are those concerns? Well, the Zimmer system is complicated because it does change two things. It changes what you do and how you do it. So what you do is the coverage call. So the Zimmer system requires that corners not just play necessarily straight man or straight zone. They have to be able to do that, but they also have to be able to switch their assignments on the fly based off of what the offense is doing. And so here's, for example, here's a checklist on a typical, I think they call it cover 7 in Alabama. But if you're an outside corner in a cover 7, you're covering the outside receiver, right? If the outside receiver goes vertical, that's it. You're covering that guy. He's your guy. If he goes out, then you have to quickly snap your eyes to the second receiver, so the slot receiver. And if the slot receiver goes vertical, you take the slot receiver. If the slot receiver goes in while your guy goes out, then you cover the out. If the slot receiver goes in and your guy has a curl, then you've got to take your guy. But if your guy goes in, then you take the slot receiver no matter what he's doing. And so that's just one play, one coverage, right? And I just nailed 3 or 4 different responsibilities based off of 2 different receivers. Sometimes you have to pay attention to the crosser on the other side of the field. Sometimes you have to pay attention to kind of what's happening underneath you. Sometimes you have to pay attention to what your safety is being asked to do. And so there's a lot of things that you have to do based off of different coverages that you have to learn that you typically, unless you went to Alabama, right? That you typically don't have to learn in college. And the rules can change every 4 weeks. And this is actually, I was having a conversation with Chad Greenway a couple of years ago when he was asking me like, why is it that PFF is so confident in their grades if they're not, if they don't know kind of the rules of the coverages and stuff like that. And I was talking to him about how they actually do consult with defensive coordinators. And he's like, okay, well, that's interesting because, one of the things that I found I was surprised by was that PFF actually got this assignment. They were talking about a specific play. They actually got this assignment right. And that was the first time that those rules had me take this guy instead of that guy. And they actually got that right. Because for the previous 4 weeks, we were following a different set of rules and we change it every couple of weeks. And so that I think is another thing to keep, pay attention to, is that the rules for who you cover and how you cover them can also change. So that's what you do. And then how you do it, the Vikings ask, the corners to do a couple of things that you don't typically do in college. You're seeing it a little bit more in college, but instead of backpedaling, they'll often shuffle. And that allows you to keep the play ahead of you. And also backpedaling is just it's a difficult technique to learn in coverage at high speed, because you have to keep your shoulders at a particular level. You have to obviously walk in a way that humans just aren't, comfortable doing. And so the backpedal technique's a little bit different, and you have to teach the shuffle a little bit. So you have to learn a new technique. All the corners do something called speed turns, which means a 270-degree turn in order to go. In order to cover a corner that's making a receiver that's making a 90-degree turn. That's not something you see a lot in college. A lot of cornerbacks are not taught to play hands in phase in college because you can get away with a little bit more, so you can kind of play the body. With Zimmer, you play the ball in phase and you play the hands out of phase. So these are all different things that, and that's true for most NFL teams, but these are all different things that you have to learn when you become a Zimmer corner, which is why it takes so long. It's also why the defense can be really good and difficult to solve. So most cornerbacks struggle as rookies, and then you add on top of that the things that they ask a Zimmer cornerback to do, and it becomes a lot to learn, especially if you've got other problems that they need to correct. Like, for example, Trey Waynes was really handsy in college, and so they needed to find a way to get him to stop grabbing jerseys and stuff like that on top of everything else.
Next question is from Todd, who asks, is starting the entire starting 11 for the Titans a good idea for fantasy this week?
Well, I wouldn't start any of the offensive linemen. Yeah, I would say that probably the matchups look pretty favorable. Adam Humphries, especially like DFS, where Adam Humphries probably doesn't cost that much. He's probably a pretty good starter. Corey Davis, I'd go in on. A.J. Brown sounds like he's not going to play, so don't do that. But Derrick Henry, wouldn't be surprised if he went off. Kari Blossingame might get a couple of receptions. We talked about that a little bit in the in the interview with Justin. So, yeah,
Yeah, there's
wild.
There's options. Damian Barrett asks, has Arif finally changed his view on candy corn, i.e. the turkey of Halloween treats?
No, I've been over this so many times now. There's two kinds of candy corn. There's the kind you buy in the store, which is made of like paraffin and carnauba wax. And then there's the kind that it was originally, which is made out of mallow cream, which you can make at home, which is delicious, right? The kind you find in the store is terrible. It's also a completely different product made with different ingredients. It just looks the same. So no, I haven't changed my mind on candy corn. Don't buy it. When you buy it, it sucks. Make it.
Is this the yearly excuse to put your recipe for the candy corn up?
I refuse to do that until October starts. So we'll get that next week.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize that it was so strict around here between Big Mac and the breakfast menu. My bad. Duke's Code asks, no question, just please vent your frustration on Dan Orlovsky. For those of you who are blessed with not having a Twitter account, Dan Orlovsky got a bit of attention this week for his, let's say, lack of knowledge on any form of spice, whether it be salt or pepper or anything more complex than that.
It was alarming. Okay, so
it was funny. It was funny as hell to see group texts of people going, "Dude, come on."
Right. So what happened was, I think Orlovsky was explaining kind of like growing up, his family didn't have a lot of money. And, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want to mischaracterize anything here. But, he said, so we had, mayo and cheese sandwiches. And someone was like, really, just cheese? Really? And he was like, yeah, it was delicious. And somebody was like, well, did you at least like put some seasoning on it, like Lawry's? And he was like, what's Lawry's? And everyone's like, "What are you talking about?" So they send a pic of Lawry's seasoning salt, and bafflingly, Orlovsky says, "Well, salt is just salt, man. All salt, it's salt is salt." And this is when things blow up, and people are like, "Not even seasonal," and they send a picture of Morton seasonal, and he was like, "Nah," and everyone's just like, "Okay, but like, you season your food, right? Like." Aside from just salt and pepper, and he says it's food, man. It's I operate by the KISS principle: keep it simple, stupid. Which is his way of saying no, he doesn't season his food at all. And it's like, it's not even like when people make jokes about white people not seasoning their food, he does not do it. Like, he ended up tweeting out a picture of his spice cabinet, a thing that he bafflingly has, and it's empty, right? Except for a salt shaker and a pepper shaker. And if that's all you have, I want you to do a little bit more for yourself. But I understand if you don't have the means to like get a little bit more. And so I want to say this next thing, it's not a knock on people who can only afford what they can afford, but Dan Orlovsky can definitely afford better pepper. Even his pepper is clearly old and powdery and not flavorful at all. It takes no time to put peppercorns in a pepper grinder and crack them over your food, and it's like 1,000 times better. And he clearly got it from like a McCormick tin, which McCormick, their spices aren't bad, honestly, but like, those old tins that like are just full of like powdered pepper that have no flavor in it. And there's like a scientific reason it doesn't have a ton of flavor. When you expose additional surface area for pepper, which as a powder, obviously it has much more surface area than, these cracked pieces. I don't like using the phrase essential oils anymore because like it's hippie stuff now, but they're called essential oils of pepper. They're volatile oils, will evaporate away really quickly. And so if it's pre-ground and it's ground that fine, it's going to evaporate away really quickly, and you're holding it for that long. He's eating dust. And then he, of all people, has the temerity to say, you all are dusting your seafood? I cannot believe it.
To me, it looked like the salt and pepper shaker that you would see at a truck stop that you were at 4 a.m. when you were drunk, and you just thought that stealing the salt and pepper shaker would be a funny idea. And then you wake up in the morning, you're like, why do I have a salt and pepper shaker here? Oh, well, I guess I'll put it in the spice cabinet, which is also to say, hey, I get to use my spice cabinet now. Like, yeah, I was greatly amused, and I'm not gonna, I can't totally begrudge the man, but that for somebody who's
like, just get some garlic powder, man.
Yeah.
Like 1 or 2 things to indicate that you like a flavor.
He's actually just got like 18 different types of lemon pepper. It's like he even did the whole like make your own thing from the Binging with Babish episode where he's like, just don't ever do this.
Don't do this.
This is dumb as hell. Just don't. Yeah, for somebody whose biggest claim to fame is walking out of the back of the end zone for a safety without recognizing where he was on the field, I'm saying that's still more embarrassing than what he had done, but that's still funny.
Yeah.
Ryan wants to get me in trouble. Ryan asks, if James were going to get engaged again, pause for wife commentary, what chain restaurant would he choose this time to make the day magical? There was a Twitter picture flying around this week of a man and a woman who were getting engaged in front of a Culver's and actually used the Culver's sign, the electronic sign, which I just think is tacky.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm going to have an opinion on that, let's go to we this is Arif's relationship corner, Uncle Arif's relationship corner. Arif, what chain restaurant would you choose?
My God, man, if I'm gonna do that chain restaurant, I'm not feeling like the Chili's, Fridays, Applebee's vibe. That's for sure. I don't want.
It's gonna be like Village Inn or.
Wait, it can't be like that. Like I was thinking like a fast casual place, like Noodles or Chipotle or something. I think I'd just pick Chipotle, honestly.
Like you're not gonna go for the existentialism of Arby's. To which
I don't want to like doom the relationship with the philosophical implications of nihilist Arby's. Like I want, Chipotle I think is like an optimist's food, right? Like I feel like
Chipotle, because you know what? Anytime I've ever eaten Chipotle, I've felt really optimistic about my whole like life at that point, moving forward. It has nothing to do with the oh God, I've eaten myself to the point of feeling like I'm going to throw, or like I decided to eat until it hurt, as opposed to it when I was full. I'm not regretting this life choice at all. When I think
I'm not saying that eating at Chipotle is a thing that only optimists do, obviously. All I'm saying is that the decision to eat Chipotle tends to be, not always, tends to be a little bit more of an optimistic decision than the decision to say eat at Arby's. I feel like people are just much more excited about Chipotle. And sometimes you're like, for me, Chipotle, I'm on a trip usually that I like, that I want to be on. And then we stop at Chipotle. That's when I very often have it. Or I'm in college, and in college, things were fun for me. So, but like Arby's, I was just like, well, Arby's is open.
Actually, I'm trying to think if I've ever seen a person smile at an Arby's, and this includes the wait staff. I'm not sure. I would really have to sit and think. I don't go inside of Arby's ever. But whenever I think of people eating at Arby's and having an existential crisis, I do think of the picture of Patton Oswalt with, I believe, his Emmy, drinking outside of the Arby's, and it looking like just fantastic performance art. What you're really missing here is you got to go rare, because if you go rare, then you're in a much better situation. So what you should probably go for instead is like a failed chain, one that only exists in a few places, and something like a Quiznos or something, just to mess with somebody. Let's go with the next question from Ryan, which is relationship corner topic. A few weeks ago, you mentioned that Christmas decorations were okay after Thanksgiving. What would you do if you found out your new girlfriend's family tradition was assembling and decorating the tree Halloween night?
How much do I like this girl? Is it my current girlfriend?
This would be your current girlfriend. In a related note, as this was 3 years ago and she now has moved in, what is the rental policy for the oft-talked-about time travel equipment? Is this a Patreon perk? Just want to keep my options open, as I've been able to fend off this tradition so far, but...
Oh, this is not even a hypothetical. Wow, okay. So, one, we don't actually own the time traveler. It's the time traveler. Just kind of comes in and advises us about the Vikings. It's totally separate. We can't offer it as a Patreon perk. We can talk to the time traveler for you. So if you want to sign up to our Patreon, submit your questions to the time traveler, I'm sure we can get that done.
Yeah, and the time traveler is definitely not Dusty.
Yeah, it's certainly not Dusty.
No, that would. Apologies if that's oddly specific, but it is definitely not. It is definitely not Dusty Underdunk O'Connell. Definitely not that.
But as to the first question, so you've successfully dodged it, and man, I cannot believe that's a tradition, and I'm proud of you for that. My girlfriend attempts to not find that many excuses to hang out with her family, and for that, I am more than happy to accommodate. I'm going to say that. And so if that's the tradition, that's that. But in a world where, my girlfriend would want to spend as much time with her family as possible, which is a fairly normal thing to do, and you don't want to disappoint her and she wants you to partake in this tradition, I would do it. And then you have to read the situation here, but I would maybe complain about it afterwards to her. And if she's not going to take that well, and that, don't do it. Like, this isn't like a go ahead to be like, Arif said on his football podcast, but the relationship corner part of it, that
football/relationship podcast,
football/relationship podcast, that, we shouldn't be doing this at all. I don't think that's going to fly well. And also, please don't make me a part of your evil. But second, yeah, I feel like, what would I do if I found out? I feel like I would like grit my teeth and bear it, because I feel strongly about it, but not strongly enough that I'm going to like poison a relationship for it. Like, that seems like a lot for like an arbitrary choice I just made.
Nonsense. This has...
Nonsense. That's all relationships are.
Yeah, this has you have potential here. What you need to do is what I did 1 year to stop being invited to the family fantasy football draft, which is just to say, make them remember that you don't need to be a part of it. That it's probably best that you stay home. I used to live tweet this fantasy football draft that I was a part of. There was a person there that would always show up in a Tebow jersey. This was years ago. This was close to like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, back when the show was first starting, and it happened for like a couple of years, and then they stopped inviting me, and it was beautiful, because all I did was just complain about it at that point. So what you can do, however, if you want to be nice to the whole family situation, is you can just it's Halloween, right? That this is happening.
It's the day after Halloween, right?
I thought it was it
is Halloween night. Oh my god,
it's Halloween night.
So decorating the tree as people are like ringing the doorbell.
Yeah. So what you do is you just dress
that
up.
Might change my answer. That's a lot.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say it.
You
That's
dress
a lot.
up. You dress up in full Wolfman outfit, like with hair, paint. I'm not say painted on, but like glued on, everything. Just the full outfit, and just make the pictures of putting the tree together just all that awkward. The problem is that if you do this well enough and your costume is good enough, they might actually ask for you to return next year, just because it was funny and they want to see if you can top it. So make sure that it's something memorable / gory. That will make it so that you're not invited to this tradition on Halloween. Like,
you're so much better at being passive aggressive than me. That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I've had a lot of practice in making terrible decisions, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Windchill asks, number one, how much would I have to bet currently on the Vikings not making the playoffs so I could enjoy at least a nice bottle of wine from the winnings when the season ends?
I don't know that bookies tend to offer reverse odds that much, but why don't we take a look at some futures? Let's see. I think 5 Dimes tends to have the most. I don't use 5 Dimes when I look at odds, but I think they tend to have the most complete. Do I have to actually log in? No, you just give me the odds. Whatever. I'll just use this other site that I've never used before in my life.
Absolutely not, because that would be illegal in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, which I don't like. I don't run afoul of the law. I'm a good citizen.
How's that working out for you?
Would you like to know more? Let's see. So, God, they changed their whole thing. So NFL futures. Here, so conference futures, odds to win the championship. Okay, that's all they got in that future. Probably division. Let's do odds to win the division. So right now the Vikings are plus 550. So if we convert money line odds to percentages, They've got like a whole thing here. Oh my God. All of these sites have changed. So the site I went to convert percentages, as soon as I clicked onto the site, they were like, "Hey, you should sign up for our newsletter." And instead of yes or no, it was or find a way to win, or keep winning, or keep losing. It was like, relax. Anyway, the implied probability here is about 15%. So the odds are about, 85%, which means, was it minus 550? So you'd have to bet 550 to win 100. Which, if you wanted a $20 bottle of wine, that's $110 that you'd have to bet on the Vikings not winning, right? So that was a lot of work for that question. But yeah, that's a lot. That's about what you'd have to bet, $110, which honestly, it's not bad.
Also asked of Arif is, what are on Arif's Burlington, Vermont area best eat lists? I am a Minnesota native in the Montpelier region for the last couple of years, and from previous podcasts, I understand he is in the area from time to time.
Yeah, every Christmas. We'll see if we make it this year, given relative travel restrictions. But I really want to find a way to get back there. So. I really like Hen of the Wood. That is a little bit more expensive, but it is so incredibly delicious. We go there about once every other year or once every other visit. So that's really remarkable. They've also got really great oysters. Where I stay is somewhat close to the August 1st Bakery, which has not just really great fresh baked bread, but incredible sandwiches that are really great for breakfast. There are also, I want to say, 2 skinny pancake locations in Burlington, one in the airport and one kind of near the beach. That's a really great breakfast place that I enjoy a lot. And we went there for, I think, the day that we flew out, we actually went to the one, not in the airport, but the one on the beach, and it was just a really fantastic time. So really great crepes. So it's called the skinny pancake because they mostly do crepes. But that was really great. We've gone to a place called the Farmhouse. That's been really good. I'm trying to remember this other, is it milkweed? What's it called? The Monarch of the Milkweed. That's it. Holy crap. Best hot chocolate I've ever had. And I mean, the food is really great, and the bar is really good. And they've got this fried pork tenderloin sandwich that's just incredible. But also, every time I go there, I get the hot chocolate. It's so good. So hopefully that's like a list of good restaurants in the Burlington area.
Don from Ohio asks, over under 325 yards rushing for Henry versus the Vikings on Sunday.
Under. At that point, they'd probably just put someone else in. I guess if by the first half. Okay, so the problem is everyone's going to be thinking of like the Adrian Peterson game where he got like 30 odd yards in the first half and then just kind of blew up in the second half against the Chargers. But I think most situations where a running back can get over 200 yards, and I remember Doug Martin was against the Vikings kind of did this, you start putting in your other back if you're that far ahead. So for the most part, I think I would probably take the under here.
If I remember correctly, the Chargers and Vikings game was actually close.
Yeah, that was part of it. Yeah. And I don't know that this question inspires a lot of this game will be close energy. So yeah. I would say the under, but not because the Vikings will stop them.
Yeah. Final question of the episode. It's 2023 and the Minnesota Vikings are 12-1 with QB Trey Lance looking like a surefire Super Bowl team. In week 14, he's injured and out for the year. Just when Vikings fans were thinking they're cursed yet again, the team puts in their backup quarterback, Carson Wentz. Just like Nick Foles in 2017, Wentz goes on an unreal run in the playoffs and Super Bowl, winning the Vikes their first Super Bowl. Already suffering Trubisky's errant throw, which caused permanent brain damage to his left side, Arif's mind is unable to handle what has happened to him, and he falls deep into a coma. Luckily for him, Eric Thompson is there reading to him every day stories of Wentz's success for the team, hoping it will help him recover. My question is this: how will Arif repay Eric for his generosity?
Okay, so a couple of things here. One,
let's just break it down.
Right. This presupposes that Carson Wentz has an ability to play in the playoffs, a thing he has never done. Not even he didn't play in the playoffs in college, unless you count that final game, the championship game. But he didn't play in the playoffs, right? Like that was it Easton Stick?
Are you trying to say that the final, that the championship is not the playoffs?
A lot of people don't count. Do you count the Super Bowl as part of the playoffs? A lot of people don't.
I do consider. I don't consider the Pro Bowl part of the playoffs. I consider the Super Bowl part of the playoffs.
I'm just saying a lot of people don't. The playoffs are what get you into the Super Bowl, which means necessarily that they're not a part of it.
No, that.
They're trying to determine the playoffs determine the AFC champion and the NFC champion, and then separately, the AFC champion and the NFC champion play each other.
Yeah, but it doesn't work like that.
That's how the Super Bowl was designed. The AFL champion and the NFL champion played against each other.
Everything involving the Chiefs franchise is awful, and I just want to say that that's how it was designed.
So anyway, Carson Wentz has not played a single playoff game in his career, high school, college, NFL. So I wouldn't think that this scenario is in any way likely. So if the depth chart is Trey Lance, Carson Wentz, and Easton Stick, yeah, I think it's Easton Stick making the run here. Second is no way, Trey Lance. Come on, man. I can't. This is ridiculous. I think as soon as, so if the Vikings draft Trey Lance, which is frustratingly well within the realm of possibility at this point, it seems to me that the Vikings will just have other stuff happen that prevent them from being a playoff team. I just feel like things will collapse around it. Anyway, I don't know that there's been an NDSU QB that's played well. Have there been NDSU players that have transitioned well to the NFL, like Joe Hag? Is that it? Not Billy Turner, not John Anderson.
There are those in the NFL writer community, NFL pundit community, who happen to think that before he was injured, that Wentz was having a superior year and was doing very well up until the point where he did something incredibly stupid against the Rams.
What, play?
This includes you begrudgingly at the time saying that his play is was up there in for discussion in the MVP category, like for MVP.
Yeah, I don't recall saying that. If you pull up an episode and play a clip, I'll call that a deep fake. Never happened.
Audio deep fake, huh?
Yeah, that's got to be easier than the video deep fakes they have now. That feels like child's play compared to video deepfakes.
Yeah, about that. But there were people that were very convinced that he was doing very well for himself until that injury, and is now again.
Yeah, so there must be a curse hanging over the North Dakota State football team, probably due to their cowardice and not willing to go up to the FBS level and play there. I just looked at the history of NDSU players in the NFL, and none of them have succeeded. The closest we have right now is Joe Hag. The rest are a list of red links on Wikipedia, which, if you're familiar with Wikipedia, you know means that they're nothing. It's nobody. It's what we got Lamar Gordon and Billy Turner and Kyle Emanuel and Tyrone Braxton. Come on.
At some point, what we should do is have some form of a bet. And if you lose the bet, you have to put together the pamphlet of all of the NDSU players in the NFL. Not instead of like, you're going to write the book on it, you're going to write the pamphlet. It'll be fantastic. I was actually in Fargo briefly today, and I did think about picking you up a Carson Wentz bobblehead from the fantastic truck stop just before you leave Fargo. So the random things that you still find in out there for that are like Wentz specific, like Eagle specific stuff is impressive still. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week to talk about the result of the Titans game, so please tune into that on Monday, late Monday night, Tuesday morning. So, Arif, where can they find your written work, and what what can we promote?
Yeah, so head over to The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. If you sign up through there, I get credit. That's pretty good for me. But also, I think they're still running the $1 a month promotion. If not, sorry, but you'll probably get 40% off anyway. So head over there if you haven't already signed up. And my next piece, which has already been submitted a day early, which I never do. Like normally I submit at 6 a.m. and my editor is like, I have to edit like 4,000 words for like in an hour. Are you kidding me? But no, I submitted a piece a day early. And this piece is what it would take or what it would look like for the Vikings to turn it around, which I know so many people have faith in their ability to do. So, yeah, please read that piece because it helps me if you do that. And also because you'd be interested in the subject matter.
Yeah. All right. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next week with more multimedia content on your Minnesota Vikings. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And please remember to always bring your wine towel. And we will be back next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.